also.
Certainly.
Welcome to another episode of NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we're talking with legendary NFL Films director and producer Bob Angelo, and we're going to be talking about a lot of his stories and his new book, The NFL Off-Camera, an A to Z Guide to the League's Most Memorable Players and Personalities. Welcome, Bob.
Hi. Nice to have. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's not every day you get a chance to talk to someone who has been as experienced in the NFL as you, and there's so many great stories. First of all, just want to give you a chance here at the beginning now to plug your book that's coming out. I'm excited for it, excited for you and everyone to read it. Tell everyone a little bit about the book that you wrote.
Well, after I retired from NFL Films in 2018. I taught at the University of Delaware, and then at Penn State, I taught a segment production course. And as I was doing all this, people were saying, why are you wasting your time on that? Why don't you just write a book about your experiences? And as I wrote in my introduction of the book, the memoirs of an NFL Films producer, that just sounds pompous. I wouldn't read it. So I kept resisting that. When COVID shut down my course at Penn State in 2020, I had a lot of spare time on my hands. So I thought, you know what, just get serious about writing this book. Even then, I couldn't maintain my enthusiasm for it because I kept getting back to that. Who cares? No one's going to publish this. No one cares about my stories. One night at a super spreader, sitting there with a friend of mine from LaSalle University, he said, Robert, how's your book? And I said, I've almost hit delete on the entire thing 10 or 12 times now. He said, tell me one of the stories. I told him the Lyle Alzado story. He said to me simply, these stories have value. Mm-hmm. Nobody had ever said that to me before. I said, why? What do you mean? He said, nobody knows what you know about Lyle Alzado. No one knows what you know about the Barr brothers. They didn't have your experiences. And I thought, oh, okay, value. So I kept writing. This was in 2020. Found a publisher. Thanks to Ray Dittinger. And the book came out on Friday, July 7th. It's in Barnes & Noble's bookstores. And of course, everything's available on Amazon within a day. And it's called an A to Z Guide. I wanted it to be the NFL A to Z originally. I was flattered that the NFL gave me permission to use NFL in the title and on the book cover because they almost never do that. Long story short, it's out. Pre-sales have been fairly brisk, and I've gotten a lot of positive response from folks. And here we are. I'm an author.
Absolutely. And I imagine as a director, you're used to telling other people's stories and sharing that. And I'm sure, when you thought about the book, it's like, it really is part of your story and how you've, grown up in, doing all these interviews and working with NFL Films. I mean, just looking at 43-year career, 21 Emmy Awards, you covered 40 Super Bowls, 850 NFL games. I mean, when you look at the what's that?
At least 850.
At least 850 games, and that just blows my mind. And when you look at the NFL from what it is now, I mean, it's just crazy how popular it is. And so I wanted to start, obviously from where you started off on NFL Films and just where it's come from then, and then how you've kind of evolved as well. So obviously you started off NFL Films, early on in, was it 1979, I believe?
I started in 75.
75.
I was hired on June 6th, 1975 at 1:35 p.m. Not that I remember. But it was a big moment in my life because I just finished graduate school at Northwestern. I really didn't have any solid job offers. And I started communicating with Steve Sable, a name I picked off NFL Films' credits as a senior at Penn State. By the time I finished grad school, he had a big stack of correspondence from me. He had scripts of radio shows about pro football that I did at Penn State and then at Northwestern. He had articles that I'd written about pro football for my local newspaper because I was a Steelers fan by then, a pretty strong Steelers fan. They stopped sucking as they did in the 60s. And in the 70s, they were all the rage. And he realized this guy really wants to work here. So brought me in for an interview, hired me on the spot, and changed my life, completely changed my life. And I stayed there for my entire working life, 43 plus years, and loved it. Went to work in shorts, worked with big name network television people my second year forward. And you said my stories. These are really stories about those people. These are stories about NFL players and coaches and owners and executives and NFL media types. I inject myself in the story because that's what makes each story a bit unique. No one had this particular event with Joe Montana in a hotel room in San Francisco where I looked outside and I saw this enormous crowd, and he saw the enormous crowd. And I said to him as I opened the door and patted him on the ass on his way out, I said, "They're not here to see me." And he walked out
That is awesome.
into this throng, and I just thought, but it's about those people. It's about them, not me. And again, my fascination with the NFL goes back to when I was playing electric football as a kid, and had to put numbers on my players. I wanted numbers. I wanted to know who every person was on my line of scrimmage and in my defensive setup. And so my first book was the 1963 Pro Football Almanac, and it just goes on from there. I mean, fascination with the game, always watched pro football every Sunday. No one had a gun to my head and said, "You've got to watch this." I loved the sport and played quarterback in high school. Fancied myself the next Ray Nitschke. That never happened. I weighed 160 pounds. That wasn't going to happen. But met Ray and worked with Ray twice as an adult. And one of my favorite people in the sport, as are a lot of the subjects in my book.
Well, we'll definitely get to some of those stories in a bit, but what I wanted to talk about, obviously when we're looking thinking of NFL films, and how I kind of grew up, watching all of the videos and hearing those old videos, and the voice of John Facenda. Now that it's just crazy, for me just to think of those early days, and when you worked with him, you were writing some of those some of those things that he was saying as well, right?
I did. One of the best lines I ever wrote was the very first line in the 1979 Pittsburgh Steelers highlight film. Now, bear in mind, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I knew that friends and family and former classmates and everybody I grew up with was going to hear this. And it was so dramatic. And as John Facenda read it, there were 27 teams in pro football. And then there were the Pittsburgh Steelers. And John could make a shopping list interesting. That deep baritone, that stage British accent, which, by the way, I have no idea where he got that, because he was a South Philly Italian who did the local news on the CBS affiliate here in Philadelphia. As while I was growing up in Pittsburgh, I learned all this later, but John didn't know if a football was pumped or stuffed. But my goodness, could he deliver a line? And wonderful to work with him. My first exposure to him came as a ninth grader at football camp, an NFL film that my high school coach showed us all. And it was something to the effect of, there are many superstars in pro football, but only one Superman. And the camera settled on Deacon Jones. And, I still remember that. And so the first time I worked with John, I saw him sitting in that recording booth, and it looked eerie. He looked like Orson Welles sitting in there. And, the cigarette smoke filling the room, unfortunately. And I looked in there and I thought, my God, that's him. I get to walk in there now with my script. And I did everything wrong. People said, don't hand him dirty copy. Don't spell things out phonetically for him. He has an easier time, picking up on names like Manu Tuiasosopo. And then whatever you do, don't ask him to speed up his pace. I ignored all that advice, did everything I was told not to do. It didn't go well. But that was my learning experience. I was 22. I thought I knew everything. I can't see you anymore. Where did you go?
Oh, I'm still here. Can you see me?
No. Can you see me?
I can, yes.
Okay. I'm not quite sure why this went away. I'm trying to bring it back, but
I can still see you.
Okay, let me just let me try one thing here.
Yeah.
Oh my, I'm sorry.
No worries.
We're gonna have to go with trust. I trust that
Yeah.
you can see me and you can I can see you.
Yes. Yep. So, I
Uh,
mean, can you still hear me?
oh yeah, John Facenda. And I went in there that first time. And then after that, I learned my lessons, plural, and did what I was supposed to do. And we worked together for the next 7 years until he died, unfortunately, tragically, at the age of 82.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of kind of obviously, working with him, is that? I mean, what sticks with you the most from that time working with him?
The fact that how a voice and how a script written specifically for that voice, how much impact it can have. People would, I would walk into a restaurant in my hometown, walk into my old school in my hometown. People would say, there are 27 teams in pro football. And they would repeat that line from the 1979 highlight. And I thought, wow, that really stuck. And I'm very proud of that, very proud of that script, that highlight film, and that team. I mean, I took it personally. I was part of the 79 Steelers, I felt by then. So the impact that John's voice could have on listeners if John's voice was used properly. A minimum amount of words, phonetic spelling so that he could pronounce the words properly, and no dirty copy, which pissed him off.
Well, yeah. I mean, some people are very specific on some of those things, and but you talked about words, how important they are, and obviously that's why I'm so excited for this book and for everyone to kind of read it, because I think words are important, stories are important, and just to get that window into that time and watching the NFL, just become so popular, and you were a huge part of that, and especially when you kind of look back now to the Hard Knocks, and that was something that you helped to obviously develop, and I want to talk about kind of early on that, and when we look at Hard Knocks now, what it is, it's going to be with the Jets this summer, and Aaron
We're
Rodgers.
doing it very reluctantly, by the way.
Yes. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, you had some great stories with Brian Billick about, what you were allowed to really do. You had free reign, didn't you, in the early days?
I knew Brian from my experiences with the Minnesota Vikings. I spent a quarter of a century following around the Minnesota Vikings from Denny Green all the way until I retired. Brian and I were friends prior to Hard Knocks. When Brian assured me, Bob, you can do anything you want to do, I said, careful what you promise here. He said, anything you want to do around my football team. Wow. The only thing I wasn't allowed to do was go into the medical training room to see players getting treatment for injuries for legal reasons that the management tossed out. And I said, no problem. If I can do everything else, no problem. So seeing players being cut, that was unprecedented. And this was not like the other reality shows. I guess they were called reality shows at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They were becoming big in the year 2001. I remember at one point, my niece, who was living with us while she was going to school here locally, said, what do you think the best reality show on television is? And I said, that's a no-brainer, mine, because you don't get voted off the island. You lose your chance to earn a living as a pro football player. This is real. Mm-hmm. And she said, wow, never thought of it that way. But Brian gave us total access. We saw every facet of training camp. And now the approval process for that show was interesting. Every Wednesday morning, prior to the show airing Wednesday night, I would have to sit down with everybody who mattered with the Baltimore Ravens, both owners, the owner and his son, the general manager, the media relations executives, and anybody else who showed up, including Brian. After the first show, Brian walked out, and there was no editing. There wasn't a lot of editing done to that first show. And Brian walked out and said simply, "Great show, Bob." Wow.
Wow.
Nothing came out, and it was laced with profanity. Now, Steve Sable was very concerned about that profanity because Steve was concerned how the league office would react to it. But here was a show giving the National Football League publicity every night to a national, or every Wednesday or every week, national television audience on HBO. And HBO Sports would promo the hell out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So after that first show, Steve Sable decided summarily, too much profanity. He passed the word along to the producer handling post-production. Let's get rid of a lot of the profanity. Let's beep it out. Let's blank it out by putting in presents. Let's try not to. Week 2, Wednesday morning, I screened the show for the Ravens. And Brian said on his way out, "Great show, Bob, but we need a few more gratuitous fucks in it." So I called Steve and said, "Steve, the whole profanity thing is not an issue with the Ravens." And I told him the story. And from that moment on, it was real.
I love that. I mean, because when you think about obviously the window into what's happening, and I think in today's day and age we kind of forget about it now. I think it just with media and everything, cameras all over the place. But when you look at that, I mean, this is real. It's not just PG-13. This is what's happening, and that's kind of what people want to see as well.
Yes, and the more that the NFL allows that, the more access they allow NFL Films, which, by the way, is a subsidiary of the National Football League, the better it is for the NFL in the long haul. Look at what these two competing spring leagues were doing with access, wirings, putting play calls out before the plays are being run, hearing the quarterback call the plays in the huddle, hearing the impacts from wireless microphones that defensive players are wearing, and then seeing replays live, not after the fact, after they've been edited and been screened for, possible whatever. That makes the league more popular. People who played football know what it sounds like down there. It's not Sunday school. These are grown-ass men moving at high speeds, big, strong, nasty men, and it's a gladiator sport, and gladiators curse, gladiators MF, the guy they just tackled and face planted, and up yours, you blah, and so we're not hiding anything. We're not shielding children from reality by allowing a bit of profanity to seep through when you're watching the National Football League.
It's interesting. Obviously, you started, early on in the 70s and coming now or through 2018. And we kind of talking about the behind the scenes. I remember I was a production assistant on a CBS affiliate morning show, and I was the cameraman and did all the camera work, in 2000 and 99 to 2000. And I remember then we started doing shots that would, at the end of the broadcast, we would pull back and show myself and the camera, and I feel like, that was kind of the time where they started to do more of the, okay, we want to see the behind the scenes stuff. Like, that's interesting to people, because I feel like, it used to be like, no, just show what's there, what's in front of the camera. But now it's all the behind the scenes stuff. And when you think of like, something that draws interest to, even like actors and actresses, people want to know the behind the scenes stuff. And with NFL, I mean, to actually, be behind the curtain, as a fan, that gets you more excited. And then, for you've been behind the curtain. When you look at, your career, what do you kind of take from being behind the curtain? I mean, was everything kind of desensitized to you, throughout your career because, this is just kind of what you've known?
Well, desensitized, no, but I saw and heard things that most people will never see and hear. And that's what I wrote about in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And I put those things in the book deliberately because, this is the kind of stuff that does go on Sunday afternoons in
Mm-hmm.
NFL stadiums or in interview situations with these men and women off camera in their homes, where
Mm-hmm.
I went, many, many times to talk to future Hall of Famers and Super Bowl champions. And I got to know these people up close and personal. I hate that, up close and personal. I got to know these people on a personal level, not just media person, football player, media person, owner. And lots of them are great guys. Some of them are not great guys.
Mm-hmm.
Society is filled with good people and bad people, people you want to know and people you don't really want to know. So is my book. Mainly the good ones, because I tended to write more about them because the experiences were more pleasant. But in a few cases, I had to go the other direction and, say not so friendly things about people that I really didn't like or respect for how they treated me or their players or people in their organizations or just how they conducted their lives in general.
Absolutely, and that's going to be an interesting part, for people to read as well. And when you look at some important moments from the book, you talk about the Emmitt Smith record-breaking story. Tell a little bit about that.
Well, I got to know Emmett pretty well over the years because I would put my camera in his face in pregame and, try to elicit a comment. That's what I did in pregame with
Mm-hmm.
my wide angle lens. And a wide angle lens is such that I had to, walk right into the person's personal space to get a response or to have a decent image. So Emmett, the day that we all anticipated he would break the NFL rushing record, invited me to ride along with him in his car. He didn't take the team bus. He took his car to the stadium in Dallas when they were playing the Seattle Seahawks. And I was in the passenger seat with a roll of film. And the film was going to run out eventually. Just as it ran out, we arrived at the stadium and I finished, showing him walk into the locker room. I could have kissed my AC when he showed up and handed me the next film magazine, and I clipped it back on and went into the locker room and finished my job. Then at the end of it all, and of course, every place, every toll booth we went through, every parking attendant who he had to identify himself to, good luck today, Emmett. Good luck today, Mr. Smith. And just being part of that, and of course, Emmett had a few phone calls, I think, on the way. I forget who he was speaking with, but to be allowed to see that. And then when Emmett came out of the locker room to walk down the tunnel to the field in old Texas Stadium, I knew that there were going to be dozens of people in front of him backing him down into the stadium. Brain went off and said, get behind him and show all the media in front of him for this big moment. And people hailed that as shot of the year. Well, it was pretty simple to make that decision. I didn't want to be part of that crowd because I had, no more rights. On the other side, there's nothing they can say or do about me. I'm in your shot. Sorry, too bad. But the shot that I got of him walking down that tunnel, and then I stopped right before he walked out into the stadium because the exposure change would have been about 4 stops. But got the shot, and shot lives on. It's one of the, I think it's the, if not the title shot in the show, Emmett, it's early on in the film, and it's one of the most important shots in the film, as I see it, of course, because I shot it.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And when you look at, the interviews, the different things that you've been a part of, another important
thousands of interviews, literally thousands.
And one of the ones that we talked about offline, and obviously being a Bears fan that I'm really interested in, is the George Halas interview. And sounds like you were the last interview that he gave. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that. I know that I was the last national interview that Mr. Halas allowed because he was in his 80s and he needed to be prepped by his people prior to the interview. So I had to send my questions along in advance, which I had no problem with because NFL Films exists to promote professional football. And what could I possibly say bad about Papa Bear? What could I conjure up about George, Mr. Hallis. I went there with Jack Whitaker, and Jack Whitaker at the time was the Eric Severide of CBS Sports. I had more respect for Jack Whitaker than basically any sports journalist I ever worked with to this day. And he's in my book. I wrote a story about him. He made me a better producer, which is one of the stories I kind of like, because first time I worked with him, I didn't do such a good job, and he let me know about it. But that day, it was, I'm pretty sure either, I know the piece aired on Thanksgiving Day, 82, pretty sure of that. And so we did it probably early November. We went to the downtown office of the Bears and went up to do the interview with him. And he was a man of few words by then, but he'd been prepped. He knew the stories we were going to pursue. He did a good job with them. And then at the end, when the cameras were off, he turned his attention to me, and he's fascinated by names and backgrounds. And I told him, well, my mother's name was Chasko, but that was the Americanized version. You know, her parents came across on the boat. Oh, yeah, well, I'm Armenian. He told me all about his Armenian background. And then he gave me the proper pronunciation for his name. And it's in the book, Gerta Stanislash Halash. And this, I'm sitting there with George Halas, the founding father of the National Football League, and he's telling me about how to pronounce his name. And I'm thinking to myself, God, you're lucky. What a great job you have. You could be doing all sorts of other stuff. And here you are with the founding father of pro football. And I thought back to my 1963 Pro Football Almanac, and that happened to be the year the Bears won their last world championship with George Halas coaching the team. And it just all came together for me. And I thought, wow, what a day. What a day.
Yeah. And with, you know, other than kind of the name, what else from kind of that interview do you remember?
Well, just hearing him talk about, the guy that they plucked from the very first big name NFL star who they signed out of college.
Jay Berwanger.
No, not him. He was a Heisman Trophy winner. But
yes, yeah.
A running back. And he talked about him. And then he talked about Sid Luckman. And I'd worked with Sid Luckman in his high rise in Chicago. And what a gentleman. What a wonderful man. We went there and he had gifts for the entire crew. Wow. And I thought, wow, you didn't have to do this. I mean, we're taking your time, but just a terrific person. And I thought, he coached these guys. I asked him about Mike Ditka, and he said, you know, he because Ditka was somewhat critical. And, you know, I believe Mike's line was, oh, yeah, George tossed around quarters like manhole covers. Great line. I mean, but that's Mike. That's Mike's sense of humor. And and I'm sure Mr. Halas was like that. One of the things I did ask him about was a story that a lot of players had told about being in Vince Lombardi's locker room. And there was a knock on the door prior to a game in Soldier Field or Wrigley Field, maybe Chicago, in, you know, early 60s. And Mr. Halas was the guy knocking on the door. And Lombardi answered, and Halas said, Coach, you better have your team ready because we're going to kick your asses today. And then he just turned and walked away.
Wow.
My stars. Now, this is common knowledge. This story's been out for a while, but to hear him tell it, I thought, again, how lucky to be here.
Well, yeah, and, you know, kind of going with the Bears as well. I mean, you had a lot of, you know, time with Walter Payton as well. I mean, you wanted to do an interview with him, but he wanted to focus on his offensive linemen.
He said, why don't you do a piece on my offensive lineman? He told this to CBS's producer. And the NFL Today show's producer said, that's not a bad idea. So he said, you'll be there, right? And he goes, maybe. He didn't show up. It was me producing and directing Phyllis George for a CBS pregame segment on the Bears offensive lineman. We did a 2-camera shoot. And toward the end of the interview, I looked off camera, NFL off camera, and I saw Walter sneak into the room and sit down in a chair and just listen. And he just, nope. Okay. he wanted his O-line to have some pub because, he respected what those men did to make him look good. Now, Walter was going to be a Hall of Famer. It didn't matter who he played for. He made those linemen better than they were as a unit. He made them better individually simply because of his ability to take on tacklers. I liked Walter's philosophy on ball carrying. I am going to be the hitter, not the hittee. I'm going to explode into a tackler and make him earn it. And we have so many shots demonstrating that. He was incredible at that. We also have at least a dozen shots of Walter leaping into end zones in the red zone. One of the most famous is one I got one day at Soldier Field that Magnavox used in a Magnavox television commercial. That was very flattering for me because I knew I got it as soon as I got it. And I said, boy, that was free and clear. And I followed him until he came up off the ground. Nobody obscured the shot, perfectly framed. Pardon my,
Yeah.
I knew I got it. And when I saw it Monday morning, when it was available to see, I thought, oh, yeah, nailed it. Well, I didn't know that Magnavox would use it for a national campaign selling their own televisions, but he was special. And when he died young like that, that was horrible. I mean, the other time that I worked with him extensively was, and not really extensively, but he came to the Chicago O'Hare Airport, top floor. That's where the NFL would hold NFL owners meetings. And I was there that day with Paul Tagliabue and various NFL owners. It was one committee that was meeting there that day for some reason. And Walter snuck into the room again and just kind of crept in. I said, my God, that's Walter Payton. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. You don't have to pretend not to exist. But he was polite, sweetness. I mean, his nickname covers it all. His nickname tells you who the man was. But he wanted to talk to the commissioner about being a minority owner for an NFL expansion team. And he waited his turn, and then he sat with the commissioner. But in the interim, I grabbed him and did a real quick interview with him. I forget what I asked him, but he did it reluctantly. And of course, he talked in that high voice like this. And I just thought, geez, this guy takes on the baddest ass tacklers in the NFL and wins regularly. And he talks like this. Special man, special guy. And when he died, I was doing work with Emmitt Smith. I think it was might have been Hard Knocks in 2002. I think, I'm not sure about this. It could have been something else. And Emmitt and Jarrett, Walter's son, had a moment on stage where after Emmitt was done speaking, Jarrett came up and hugged him as if he was his father. And Emmitt felt the same way. He felt the same way because he respected Walter Payton like you cannot imagine. And to Emmitt's credit, when he broke Walter's record, I mean, he made sure to pay homage. And kudos to Emmitt for being a good man. Kudos to Walter for being a special guy.
Absolutely. Well, talking about a special guy that everybody knows now, Andy Reid. Obviously everyone's talking about Bill Belichick as the greatest coach of all time, but Andy Reid is really kind of getting up there with what he's done. And obviously you worked with Andy Reid when he was with the Packers. Talk a little bit about him and your maybe interactions with him.
I did not know who this guy was, but he was speaking to Brett Favre the way Mike Holmgren would speak to Brett Favre, except without that legal authority as head coach. And Brett would sit and listen to this round-faced head, assistant coach, who apparently was an offensive tackle in the collegiate ranks and aspired to be a coach. That's what he wanted to do. And I thought to myself, I tucked that information away because he, again, I'm shooting this as it's going down. And he would look at my camera, look up at the boom microphone, and go right back to his business. That is what we want from assistant coaches. We're here to shoot you to capture the moment when you're instructing, correcting, edifying your charges. Here you are speaking to a future Hall of Fame quarterback, and I don't even know your name yet, but this guy's listening to what you're saying. And so I learned his name and was not surprised when Holmgren recommended him to the Philadelphia Eagles to become a head coach. Andy, in his rookie season, invited NFL Films to do a 6 days to Sunday with him and his team. And he gave us the week. A 6 days to Sunday is a very invasive project for a football team. We are in the locker room. We are in meeting rooms. We are on the practice field. We are wiring players. We are doing all these things that most coaches wouldn't allow. Andy, as a rookie head coach, invited us in. And then one of the things he did, which I remember to this day, was he got this enormous pile of papers off his shelf and put it down and flipped them down to the exact day that we would be shooting one of his practices for this particular show, and showed me his schedule. And I thought, I have never seen this kind of organization before, except with, maybe somebody like Mike Holmgren or a Bill Walsh or somebody in that line. And basically everybody is in the Bill Walsh, line, because it all comes from Paul Brown. At any given time in the NFL, all 32 NFL head coaches can trace their lineage back to Paul Brown. But that said, I thought to myself, again, he's showing me this. He wants me to know, I know what I'm doing here, A, and B, I'm allowing you to show it, to put it out there in its raw form. They got beaten that weekend. I think Doug Peterson quarterbacked the Giants or the Eagles that day against the Giants. Giants beat them. They started their season undefeated or winless. I'm sorry. Started their season winless, 0-4, I think, 0-3, 0-4, something right in. And never really got it turned around. But Andy Reid was confident in his skill set to be an NFL head coach. He wanted people to see that. And consequently, it allowed NFL Films access to a guy who is now, he's in that argument. He's in that discussion for, who the greatest coaches of all time. If he wins a couple more Super Bowls prior to his exiting the sport, not only may he be in the top 3 in victories, but, he could be in that discussion of, hey, Belichick had Brady. Andy did this with Mahomes. It took a while for Andy to get that guy because McNabb was not that guy. But, he got him. And once he got him, he knew what to do with him.
And not only that, and we've talked about this as well, some coaches, some people in the profession were fantastic at their job, but maybe not good guys. But, when you talk about Andy Reid,
great guy.
And yeah, no one has anything bad to say about him.
Well,
or
the one thing I do remember about Andy, and it's not about Andy, it's about, someone in his family. We did that show. And I was just describing the 6 days to Sunday. And on Saturday, I rode with Andy in his SUV to his son's high school football game. Now, we didn't have his son wired that day, but we were ISOing his son, so we would have B-roll. And so I got out of the van and, said, Andy, let me get set up here. I got my camera set. And then I followed him as he walked through the high school stadium. Andy's a big man. And, of course, everybody's pointing, that's Andy Reid. He's the Eagles head coach. And Andy went over to a particular place where his wife was sitting. And her first question was, who's that? What's the camera? And he said, that's Bob Angelo from NFL Films. He's part of the family now. And his wife said, well, he's not part of our family. And I said, ooh, ouch for me. I mean, what did I do? But, didn't stop us from shooting, getting the footage that we needed, telling the story. And Andy was a terrific person and still is.
I love that, quote about what Andy said. I mean, and maybe that's why everybody, loves him so much is, you were part of his family. If you were, just in the vicinity, I mean, that's an amazing, I'm a Bears fan, but I'm a football fan. And just to see kind of what he's done, with the Chiefs, with, just his career. It's just, I'm sure it was validating for him, but, for a lot of people when he won that first Super Bowl, you can't imagine that.
I was so happy for him. And here in Philadelphia, there is still that aftertaste of Andy Reid. A lot of people here don't like him. I think it's simply because he didn't win a Super Bowl while he was here. Well, guess what? If he gets just a little bit more out of Donovan McNabb in any of those championship games into the Super Bowl where they did play and lost to the Patriots, if he gets anything out of McNabb, he wins a Super Bowl here. But he took the Eagles to 4 consecutive AFC championship or NFC championship games. Come on. You know, the man's a winner. The man knows how to run a football program. And when I hear that from people here, that residual, I think, grow up. Grow up. Look at what the man has done over the course of his career, and he's still doing it. And when he left here and was signed by Kansas City like within 2 weeks, I thought, oh, Andy, please, you know, you need a year off. Well, couldn't have been more wrong. Andy is a football coach. That's what he does. That's his identity. And he's really good at it.
Well, speaking of someone who's really good at something as well, Tom Brady, you know, was in those Super Bowls and arguably the greatest quarterback of all time. You know,
I hate to admit that, but yes.
So, what was your interaction with Tom Brady?
Almost none, because Patriot security was really difficult to work around. And NFL Films knew that I had a problem with Patriot security, and they never put me in that situation. The one time they did put me in that situation, I had words with somebody on the Patriot sideline. Not so long after that, Patriots had a new security person who was kind of well known in the NFL, a hard ass. A lot of people didn't like him. Bottom line, I couldn't get close to Tom Brady most of the time and didn't try to. The one time that I did, and I made an exception for Tom Brady in my book. He is the only person in my book with whom I did not have an extended personal interaction. The reason I put him in the book was I shot the Falcons sideline, and I think it was Super Bowl 51 or 53, not sure which, 51, I believe. And they had that 25-point lead in the second half. The lead, after some miscues and a quarterback sack that shouldn't have occurred, went down to 16. It was at that point that I was shooting along the Falcons bench, and fights were breaking out in position groups, the linebackers, the defensive backs, the defensive linemen. There was anxiety, and they were expressing it. You know, people were pointing fingers and assigning blame when they looked up at the scoreboard. And at one point, Dan Quinn had to come over and, you know, calm things down because these guys were ready to go at it. And I thought to myself, that guy is sitting 75 yards away, and you're looking at the scoreboard doing the math. 16-point lead, a touchdown and 2. Then we only have an 8-point lead. Another touchdown and 2, and the game's tied. And I said, you guys are toast. You're toast. He's going to come out and kick your asses. And he did. Now, he needed a great catch by Edelman. And Edelman came up with that great catch, and that was it. At that point, I said, this game's over. Doesn't matter what happens from this point on. Falcons couldn't beat the Patriots with rifles. You know, just they're not good at you. You're dead. You're dead in the water, and they were.
And when you talk about the Patriots also and not having that access, do you think a lot of that came from Bill Belichick and kind of being famously,
all of it, because Robert Kraft was a wonderful guy to be around. But Bill grew up in that school with Parcells, and Bill Parcells didn't want cameras behind his bench, et cetera, until the league finally, the NFL owners Rules Committee, passed a new bylaw that granted NFL Films specifically the right to use sound equipment and boom microphones in bench areas. And, you know, Parcells and others kept fighting that, but losing battle, because when it comes from the owners, you know, now coaches still challenge that. And I am giving you a perfect transition to Sean Payton if you want to go there. But,
well, yeah, we can definitely talk about Sean Payton. You know, he is one of those, you know, successful coaches. He has the Super Bowl, but you've had some not so pleasant interactions with him then.
Yeah, Sean doesn't want boom microphones in and around his bench area. And at Soldier Field one day, playing the Bears, he came back and attacked me. And when I say
Wow.
attack, like get that camera the F out of here. And, dropping the F word, et cetera, et cetera. I told my
Yeah.
sound freelancer from Chicago, just stay here, stay right here. This is as bad as it gets. And that's one of the stories that had to come out of the book, according to the league. Documented, it happened, but it wasn't going to be in the book. And I didn't fight it because they left enough in for me to make my point about Sean Payton, because the rest of it's all documented. Rodgers suspended him for an entire season and suspended his defensive coordinator for life. Now, his defensive coordinator found his way back, as did Sean. But sorry, yeah, you were running a bounty program and you didn't want people to hear it. And I guess I heard it. And too bad.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, when you're at that level, you want to be able to control things, but obviously, control things that are legal or within the NFL, and part of what you did was, I mean, you talk about your career, you've really promoted the NFL with everything that you did, and that having the microphones, having that there, that's part of promoting the NFL, and I'm sure obviously he there was a lot of things that he didn't want you to share.
Yes, and once we captured them, we didn't really have to run them by Sean for permission to put them in our shows. I don't remember ever getting a specific bite where I thought to myself, wow, that sounded really evil, really wicked. But I think, Sean was just trying to prevent it from happening. And again, I don't know what his motives were. I don't know him. I interviewed him twice after all of these things happened. And he walked into the interview room. He recognized me immediately. Of course, I know, what our history was. He sat down, did the interview, was very professional about it all. To his credit, he's a stand-up guy that way. But the rest of it...
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if any of the things that you shot had become evidence in that, what the league was looking at.
I wouldn't know. I'm not sure what the league reviewed, other than, the thing that was internal. Apparently there was production work going on internally where people were sitting in on his meetings, defensive, coaches meetings, and maybe the coordinators meeting. I'm not sure about any of that. I can only speculate, but apparently some of that came home to seal the deal.
Absolutely. Well, and talking about the person that can seal a deal, you've had experiences with Paul Tagliabue and maybe even Roger Goodell. And so talk a little bit about them. I had a chance, I went to the NFL draft and had a chance to, it's so interesting. We've got this, at the draft, everyone boos him, but he's fantastic. He I think he knows how to play to the crowd, walk down to the crowd, and we got pictures with him. He was signing. He's like, was asking for the kids, and my daughter brought the football, and he, pictures and signed everything for, a long time. Obviously, it was late rounds of the draft and everything, but I think, as far as a promoter, he kind of knows what to do that way. So talk a little bit about maybe the commissioners and your experience with him and also Paul Tagliabue.
Well, I actually go back to Pete Rozelle.
Oh yeah.
I met Pete at a function, an NFL Films function, where he was a guest, and I cut the opening for the NFL Today show. And one of the shots in the opening was a shot of Preston Pearson accidentally stepping on a player's back on the sideline. And of course, I sunk that up with a timpani, boom, and that's all he had to say to me. Oh, you're the guy who cut that opening with the guy getting stepped on? Yeah, it was me. Later on, I was in his stepdaughter's wedding, Jeannie Cook. I was in the wedding, but by then that had been forgotten. Paul Tagliabue, of course, I think it was the 175th ballot where he finally got the job, because everybody thought that Chicago Bears general manager, going blank on the name now, was going to get the job. Help me out here. You're a Bears fan.
Oh, I didn't even know that he was in the running.
He was a finalist. He went to the Saints. He started with the Bears. I'm going blank on his name, but he did.
That'll come to me too. Yeah.
Paul Tagliabue got the job. I worked with him once in his office. He was totally agreeable. I said, I want to do a walking shot where we're going to follow you as you come away from your desk and come and sit down in the front of the desk. Sure. We had a wireless mic on him, and he couldn't have been nicer to work with. At one point, his secretary was going to order lunch, or actually, we were going to, I forget how it played out. We were going to buy lunch for Paul and his executive assistant, pardon me, not his secretary. And I mentioned that to her, and she got all uppity about it. Like, who do you think you are? I said, no. We're going to buy lunch. I'm asking, how should we go about this so that Paul can remain on the set and we can continue working? Oh, okay. She got her feathers ruffled there for a moment. But that said, couldn't have been nicer to work with. Roger, even better. I mean, I got to know Roger when Roger was determined to bring pro football to Jacksonville. And I had to do a stadium film for him when the old Gator Bowl was being remodeled and turned into their stadium, which is now where the Jacksonville Jaguars play. And he wanted a very specific kind of film to sell permanent seat licenses because people had never really heard about them before. And he wanted it to look hip and modern and so forth. And so I actually went to places I had never gone before as a filmmaker to make sure that he would like the film. And he loved it. And he sent a letter to me, and he copied Steve Sable. This project could not have been done better. So Roger and I always had that in our backgrounds. And every time I've ever seen him, he's always recognized me by name. As a matter of fact, at my retirement dinner in 2018, he walked over toward my wife, who was standing at the table where I had just been. He saw me there. And my wife kind of recognized him. Didn't quite, and she was about to ask him, did you work at NFL Films? And he said, no, but I'm here to see your husband. And he said, by the way, nice hair. And my wife right back, my wife's a redhead. And she said, nice hair. And I said, right back at you. He said, no, I'm here to see your husband. And I came back and said, hey, Roger, how you doing? And she goes, oh my God, it's a commissioner. And it was a nice moment. But, Roger congratulated me on my many years of service, et cetera, et cetera. And I always kind of kept that in my back pocket just in case, the league, NFL legal would try to do too much to my book. I would say, Roger, come on. They're trying to get my book here. Can you? Yeah, I'm a friend of football. Can you tell them that? But I never had to use that card. Thank goodness.
That's awesome. So was that Jim Finks that almost got it?
Absolutely was Jim Finks.
Wow, I didn't realize. Okay, I learned something about my Bears.
He was the favorite going in. And then people started looking at Roger's background as an attorney, and they said, we're going to have a lot of legal problems going forward here with free agency, et cetera, et cetera. Perhaps we ought to, go with the attorney rather than the football guy. And Finks was a football guy, a general manager. He knew player personnel. He knew team management, all that kind of stuff. But having that legal degree, which is something Roger does not have, and he's very vocal about that. I'm not an attorney. Roger started in public relations with the Jets. And I don't recall working with him, but I recall seeing his face, when I was working around the Jets once when I was doing something with Mark Gastineau, I think. I forget, but back in the day.
It's funny. Actually, I have NFL Network on in the background, and there was the stuff on Mark Gastineau. So
that's one of the stories I took out of my book. I did it by design because my book was 101,000 words, and the publisher said 92,000 max. So take out the ones that have the least impact. And visually, that story had impact for me because I saw Mark Gastineau climb up to the top of his house, get on the roof, and jump into his swimming pool. Wow. But I couldn't describe that to people in a way that would have impact. So I said, well, I'm going to have to take that one out. But Mark was a little, he was out there.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the characters from the 70s, 80s. It now, I'm sure you've seen it change a little bit. When you look at when you first started, you talked about one of the players, maybe scoffing at the microphones and everything like this, but now it's almost like some of the players kind of play to the cameras, and obviously they use social media and everything, and so how has maybe kind of what you've done with NFL Films, Hard Knocks, kind of really maybe influenced the game and players?
Excuse me. The smart players play to the camera, especially in pregame. The smart coaches do the same thing. Why not? Why not elevate your own status? Why not put other things on your resume that's out there, that's on the record? Why not? Assistant coaches in particular who are looking to advance their careers know where our microphones are and take advantage of that. Players who aren't overpaid and overexposed all understand what we do. Sometimes they don't want us around. I understand that. In certain situations, some coaches, despite NFL rules allowing us in post-game locker rooms, don't let us in post-game locker rooms. It's dutifully reported. Nothing is done about it. How has it changed the game? It has made players more aware of what can be done if you understand a bit about public relations. All you need to do is promote your own product, and you're basically your own product. Your agent represents you, but you're an agent. You're a free agent. You're a football player. Your career can end like that with an injury. So why not max out your exposure? And then ultimately, when it comes time to negotiate your contract, be surprised how that affects the leverage. I've been a 3-time All-Pro. Maybe it would have only been a 1-time All-Pro had not been for NFL Films' cameras and a wiring that the player did one time, or a soundbite that made the player more popular as a potential subject of a segment of a film, of a production. I mean, a lot of players today love the fact that NFL Films does this thing called A Football Life. It's a series.
Love that. Yes.
I mean, I was involved with a few of those, and what a great end to a Hall of Fame career, or maybe not a Hall of Fame career. I mean, but one of the things I had to do one time was speak with Jim Brown about being on A Football Life production. It was late in his life. I was in Cleveland. I was third on the list for Jim Brown that day to do an interview. And I walked out into the lobby, and there he was sitting. He was sitting right there. And all these millennials in the room wouldn't even look at him. I mean, they were just afraid to look at him. And I walked over and said, Jim, Bob Angelo, NFL Films, you and I worked together at the Stardust in Las Vegas in 1982 with Irv Cross. He goes, I remember that. He said, are you ready? And I go, yeah. When Jim Brown says, are you ready? Yeah, let's go. So we went in and did our interview. Poor producer, I think he was from ESPN. He walked in, waited for a break in the interview, and said, Mr. Brown, I think I was supposed to get you before. And Jim turned that stare on this guy, and he said, we're in the middle of something right here. And that poor dude tucked his tail and walked out of the room. And I just avoided the lobby on my way out. I didn't even want to deal with him, but intimidating. But yeah, even Jim Brown at that point in his life realized, yeah, I'd like to be remembered that way, the way you guys do that. And so NFL Films is good for pro football. Always has been good for pro football. Hard Knocks is good for pro football. And the people who don't acknowledge that and recognize that, well, come out of your cocoons, really.
Well, it's interesting. So obviously, watching the story on John Madden, so interesting to kind of see all of that. And then Lawrence Taylor, had a quote in that was shown that said, I don't know if he didn't want to be interviewed, but when it was about Madden, that he would. I mean, was he a tough one to kind of, talk about intimidating LT, but was he a tough one to get an interview from?
I never had a problem with him. He would always, not always, sometimes he would say, you got 5 minutes, okay, got it, LT. And I would make sure he was out of there in 5 minutes. I mean, Bill Parcells did the same thing to me once. He said, You can come into my staff meeting for 5 minutes. If you're there 5 minutes and 1 second, I'm going to run your ass out. Okay. So I had my watch and I knew exactly where we were. And later on, some of the Patriot players said, what goes on in there? Fill us in. I said, I can't do that. You're going to have to watch the show. But just the fact that I got in there, because Bill didn't do that often, but Bill had gotten kind of used to me being around, and he granted us that one, which was kind of nice. But again, access. Why would you deny NFL Films access? We're not going to make the league look bad ever. We're not going to make you look bad. We're the most successful Emmy award-winning public relations firm in the history of professional football. Although now NFL Films and NFL Network both have to go there. They have to go there. Otherwise, they lose legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
They have to tackle the tough subjects.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like I could talk to you forever about this. I definitely appreciate you coming on.
I can talk for 2 weeks about pro football and not say the same thing twice.
I love it. Yeah. And so want to give a chance to you plug your book. I mean, talk about access. I mean, really, the book, it really is access into history of pro football and just, so many great stories there. So
okay,
where can everyone find it again?
Well, it's at Barnes & Noble.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not stocked, they will get it in stock if you walk in there. And of course, the easiest way is just to go on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
2 ways. You can type in the book title, The NFL Off Camera, or you can type in www.bobangelo.com, and the book will come up there as well. Proud of it. I said earlier that my personal requirement was I had to have had an extended interaction with the player or the coach or the owner or the general manager to include that story in the book, because otherwise it can be, you can look it up on Wikipedia or Google search. And I stuck to that with the exception of Brady.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 55 Hall of Famers in the book, 45 Super Bowl champions in the book, and possibly more to come depending on how things go, because 2/3 of the men and women are still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And but the stories that I like most actually go back to the 60s or earlier, because I grew up watching the Green Bay Packers and Paul Hornung and Jim Taylor and Ray Nitschke, who was my hero. I had a poster of Ray above my bed, and I fell asleep to that every night in high school. I realized I would never be Nitschke because I was, as a quarterback. And Ray was a high school quarterback, but he was also a linebacker or whatever he played. He had 2 positions. Then when he went to the University of Illinois, he had to change his positions. And of course, the rest is history. Hall of Fame linebacker, one of the greatest ever. Mm-hmm. Those stories, Frank Gifford, another guy I didn't really get along with, but I admired him growing up, and I watched him growing up. Otto Graham. A lot of people hear that name. I interviewed Otto 3 times and really got to know the guy. And, what a guy. The old Steelers, going way back. Actually, I didn't really do the old Steelers, but I did Chuck Noll. And when I sat down with Chuck said to me, I was only 25 years old when I sat down with him. And at one point I mentioned some names of players from the old Cleveland Brown teams where he was an offensive guard. And when the interview ended, he said, "How old are you?" And I told him, he said, "How do you know this stuff?" And I said, "Well, it starts with my 1963 Pro Football Almanac and goes from there, because I've always loved the sport." He goes, "Well, good for you. You're in the right place." So hopefully that comes across in the stories that I wrote in the book. And so far, a lot of people are saying good things about it. And I don't necessarily know these people. They're people who are reading the book and saying, "Hey, I didn't know that about Jim Taylor or Paul Hornung or Irv Cross or, pick a name." There are lots of, as I said, big names in the book. And some of my favorite stories are the stories about lesser people, where we just had an interaction, and the person would say something incredible, and I just built the whole story around that one thing that the person would say to me.
Well, I'm so glad that you didn't press delete on this now. So
Me too. The NFL Off Camera, it's a good read. It's a random access menu. If you don't like the story you're reading, you can find another one, because the story you're reading is only going to take you 8 minutes to read. And in a lot of cases, less than that. So, and from what I'm hearing from people, and believe me, my two toughest critics are my son and my wife. And my son read some of the stories and said, Dad, you made a few factual errors, but these are really good. And my wife, who read all 8 of my screenplays and other things, said, didn't like any of it. She said, you're onto something here.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that from her. That told me I had to finish.
Well, I definitely appreciate your time. So excited, for everyone to kind of get a chance to dive into the book. And, I appreciate all the stories that you shared, and look forward to connecting, sometime in the future again. Thanks again, Bob.
Alrighty. Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, this has been NFL Outdated coverage series on legendary NFL films director and producer Bob Angelo and his new book, The NFL Off Camera. Find it everywhere, and go ahead and give it a read. And looking forward to it. Thanks again.
Thank you.